It's a special episode. This is the first episode where we are doing our first media review. So media review means movies, TV show, or anything like that. And I have a very special guest. All right. This is my son, everybody. Welcome, my son. Yay. This is Isaac. Isaac, say hello.
Hi, nice to meet you. I'm Isaac. That was weird.
Yeah, that was really weird. Nice to meet you.
Everyone.
All right. Lion's Den Nation or Lion Tree Nation. Say hello to my son, Isaac. Ladies, he's eligible.
That's disgusting.
Yeah, I can't do that. All right, let's just start over. No, I'm just kidding. All right. So today we are going to, like I said, we're going to review our first batch of media, and today's special because we're going to be reviewing one of our favorite shows. We've binged it, we've watched it over and over again, we took down copious amounts of notes, and the show that we're going to be reviewing, wait, what's up? What's that? Oh, ah! Upside down. So this is a special episode where we review
Stranger Things.
In particular, Stranger Things Season 3. Yeah. So what do you think, Isaac, overall? What do you like it?
Yes.
Do you like the series?
Yes, I think it's very, I didn't grow up in the time, but it's very nostalgic.
Okay, so when you say nostalgia, like when you think nostalgic, what are you thinking? Like you're thinking like what does nostalgia do for you?
I don't know, it's just like I just think of like
we should have had a Demogorgon right here. Demogorgon lion. Anyways, you think what?
Like sort of stereotypical, like when you think of retro and things like that, like the 80s is just like nostalgia.
That's funny because for me nostalgia is like the 70s and the 60s, like all the hippies and stuff like that. That's what I think of as nostalgia. But yeah, man, I'm telling you what, this series, and I'll talk a little bit more at the end of it, at the end of the podcast, but this series is just one of the most accurate representations of the 80s that I've, with exception of movies from the 80s, of course, but like a period piece, because this is technically a period piece because that was 30 years ago.
Right.
And actually it was more than 30 years ago, 10, 20, yep. Because it happens before 1989, it's 2019.
84 is the first
83, 84, right. And I think I calculated, I think these kids are essentially like 3 years older than me, would be 3 years older than me. Let's see, because they're 12, 11 is 12, right? Or something.
Something like that. They're in middle school. They're in 8th grade.
Yeah, because I didn't go to middle school till the late 80s. So yeah, they're about 4 years ahead of me, probably 4 or 5 years. But yeah, from the onset, from the moment that we saw the first season was fantastic. It just brought so many memories to me. As a matter of fact, I remember, I think it was in the 80s. I can't remember what movie it was, but they used our high school for a movie back in the 80s. I think it was Teen Wolf or something else. I can't remember. I can't remember what movie they filmed there, but I remember thinking, "Oh, that's so neat that they filmed a movie, a period piece at our high school there. You've seen our high school. It looks really cool, and I'll put a picture of what our high school looks like. You'll see it right here. And but the gymnasium is what they used from what I remember, and they used it to portray the 50s.
Oh, okay.
And so to me, like back in the 80s, the 50s and the 60s were nostalgic. Like, whoa, remember the 50s and 60s. And that's what to you the 80s would be.
The
like
80s, right.
Like I was thinking, the 50s, and this is super old for you. But I think you could probably still relate. Can you relate to any of it?
Some of it. I remember having VHS tapes when we, like VHS systems and the little tiny TVs when we lived in Killeen.
Yeah, but VHS, did we have? I remember we had our first VHS player in 1989. And let me see.
Into the 80s.
Yeah, we had our first VHS player in 1989, and the very first VHS movie we bought, because I remember I wanted it so bad, I bought it before we even had a VHS player. Was the original, the Michael Keaton Batman, the first Batman movie that they made outside of Adam West, and that was a really really cool cool thing to have. I remember having the VHS before we actually had the VHS player, and we bought a VHS player just so we could watch the movie Batman. But yeah, it was expensive. I'm like, I'm gonna buy this movie. I don't know how we're gonna play it, but we're gonna have it. Let me see here. Got to send a message real quick.
Oh, another thing that they have, that's a big theme in the show, that we still have today, is the Dungeons and Dragons. People play that all the time still.
Oh, I'm glad you mentioned that, because when we were growing up, anybody who played Dungeons and Dragons, we were told to stay away from, because they were devil kids. Like, I'm dead serious. We grew up, if you've been listening to the podcast for, the last several episodes, we grew up very religious, and we were told to stay away from Dungeons and Dragons. It's really funny because that was the big thing in the 70s and the 80s. Dungeons and Dragons is of the devil and everything like that. And rock music is of the devil. It's Satan. And Kiss was Kings in Satan's service and all this ridiculous stuff that we look back now and laugh. But culturally, that's what people were afraid of for their children. And then in the 90s, it was Pokemon. They were like, oh, these are just representations of little demons that you can carry around in your life. And so Pokemon was code word for pocket monsters or something like that. And I don't even know what the 2000s, it was probably, the advent of the internet and a whole bunch of different things. And, a lot of people, well, I don't know about that. No, that wasn't necessarily like stay away from Craigslist or anything like that. I can't remember what necessarily was the big vice in the 2000s. But, the point is that Dungeons and Dragons was really frowned upon by, Christian circles. Like, stay away from it. And now we look back at it and it's like tame compared to like the video games that are out today. Right. The music is tame compared to, it's there's classic rock stations and you listen to that music like, oh yeah, I remember those days, and it was just frowned upon then, but now it's looked at with normal. Yeah. It's not just normal, but, get up closer, a little bit closer, just a little bit. Yeah. It was a little bit, disdained, but people now look at it with fondness and they're like, oh, those are the days, simpler times. And we didn't have all the fangled dangled stuff that we have now, especially all the capabilities that we have now to film and to do this podcast and everything like that. None of that was available. But yeah, so Dungeons and Dragons, it's like tame. You look at, there's a lot of like, it's not any worse than Harry Potter.
Right.
Harry Potter, and well, I guess some people would probably not want their kids watching Harry Potter, but we watch it, so we're okay. I don't know. So yeah, that's a very good point. Dungeons and Dragons. That's how it all started. So I guess some people that are real extreme would be like, see what happens when you play with the devil's games. You open up worlds that you don't know, and it's like, well, I don't know. We could have a discussion about that at another time with maybe some different people, but I think a lot of people just take that to an extreme. You could take anything to an extreme. I mentioned to your mom that anything taken an extreme can hurt you. Because you could die from water. It's called drowning. So drowning is a thing, and water's supposed to help. Anything that it becomes a vice in your life can be bad. But we look back, Dungeons and Dragons is a huge part of this new series, of this worldwide phenomenon called Stranger Things. And so season 1 I thought was fantastic. Whenever they start these new series, I'm always excited to see what else they come up with the next season. And I really didn't think that they could top season 1. Season 1 was fun. It was just so much fun. And the way that they portrayed the upside down and all of these different things, it was just fantastic. And then season 2 came out. What did you think about season 2?
It was definitely on a larger scale than season 1. I think there were a lot more comedic elements of the second season. The first season seemed a little bit more serious in terms of kind of setting everything up. And then the second season, they played around with more character development, I think.
Yeah. I think they did a disservice to Will a little bit, because Will's character, I think we're going to talk about it in season 3. I think you see a little bit more of his personality coming out in season 3. But in season 1 and even season 2, he was kind of like
Very closed off.
Yeah, very closed off, and actually I liked him the most because he's the central character. I mean, 11 is the one that fights all the evil off, but he's patient zero. He's the character that that pretty much sets everything off. Without him, you know, the rest of the seasons would, I mean, he never goes missing, so nobody ever goes searching for him.
Right.
I mean, I guess there's a story to be told about 11, but without the 4 central boys and Will in particular in his situation, you know, 11 doesn't join up with them and everything like that, because they never go out to look for Will, and they never find 11. So Will is an underserved character, underrated to a certain degree, and I think that I really appreciate what they did in this season with Will to kind of develop, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So season 2 was, I think season 2, did they mention the Russians at all in season 1?
No.
Not at all?
No. I don't know if they even did in season 2, really.
Yeah, they did. Remember, it was a Russian. Remember, that's how that
Murray with
Murray, yeah.
Russian conspiracy.
The Russian conspiracy, and so they introduced it. So this is why it's such a smart series. It's almost like Marvel has a 10-year arc, right, for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, phase 1, 2, 3, and 4. And you'd be silly to think that phase 5, 6, and 7 are probably are already planned out.
Right.
So it's like it's like this with Stranger Things, that they've created the whole series start to end. And I'll talk a little bit about some spoiler predictions that we have about that.
I remember the Duffer Brothers who produced the series, they were talking about how even with this next season, they already have like broad strokes as far as what they want to do, and it's just getting down the nitpicky details of the story and the characters and things like that they're working on. So like when I sit down to write a script, there's three phases before you actually write a script, kind of. And I guess it depends on, for me, because it depends on who you ask. There's the outline, which is just like, these are just general ideas, you know, the order of things. Then there's a skeleton where you flesh out, you know, segments of the story a little bit more. And then there's a treatment, which is like, okay, well, how are we going to make this, how would this movie play out, you know, over the course of 2 or 3 hours? And then you get to writing the script. So they're probably at the skeleton stage, I think. Those are the broad strokes, because I think they've outlined it from the very beginning. Right. And they have a story, because it's not created by the Duffer Brothers. They're just are they the creators, or they're the creators of it? You sure? I'm going to look it up. I'm going to fact check you on that. Let's see, because I thought I saw somebody else's name that was the creator of Stranger Things. Let's see. Stranger Things. Oh, no, yeah. They created it, and then them and what's the other guy's name? I thought I saw somebody else on there. There's another guy who he directs some of the episodes, and then he's also a producer of the show. I can't remember. Oh, Sean Levy? Yeah, Sean Levy. Yeah. And so, yeah, the Duffer Brothers are solely responsible. I'd love to so what was the catalyst for them to create the series? Like what were they doing where they said, oh man, this would be great, you know? Right. I have an idea, because this show came out in 2016, right? 16 or 17. I think 16. All right. And there's an incident that happened around 2016 that a lot of people really wasn't worldwide. Well, I guess it was worldwide news, because it was really worldwide news back in 30 years ago, which I'll get to in a little bit. But so they introduced Russia into that would be 1984, right? 84, yeah. Okay.
So a little bit of a spoiler warning is I think that there's going to be 5 seasons.
5.
Yeah, a lot of good series end usually about 5 seasons. A couple science fiction, especially like Fringe ended in 5 seasons. Another one that isn't science fiction, but Breaking Bad was 5 seasons. It's almost like that's the golden number right there. Like 5 seasons is enough to see character growth, story arc, completion. There's a couple of ones like Game of Thrones. I think that they were 8 seasons, but they had so much content. But I don't know. I could see them going to about 5 seasons. I depending on what broad strokes and how many episodes, because how many episodes have each season had so far?
The first season had 8, and then the second had 9, I believe.
And then this last one had
8 as well.
8. Yeah, I would like to see if they're going to complete the series. It probably needs to have at least 12, or it would be cool if they
Like the last.
or if they stopped with 11 episodes. Yeah, for the last season. Because I could see a lot of things happening in season 4. But then again, I guess we'll just have to wait. We'll just have to wait for things, for things to kind of close up. I do have I keep wanting to say stuff about about my prediction. And but anyway, so season 2 ends with the lab closing out finally, and them closing out the lab, and Murray sitting at the gate, waving at all of them, goodbyes, like, oh, these guys, and season 3 opens up. So here we go. Hold on, before we continue, everybody, this is major spoilers coming. So please, if you have not seen Stranger Things season 3, go watch it, come back, and then add your comments and things below, and then you'll be able to enjoy this podcast a little bit better. But Stranger Things season 3 starts out. Do you remember?
It's in Russia.
It's in Russia, right? And what are they doing? They're
trying to open the gate.
Yeah. So it said. Does it say in Russia? Does it say Russia? Mm-hmm. It says Russia, right?
Yeah.
But then that's a huge detail. Mm-hmm. It's a huge detail because it doesn't work, right? They're trying to figure out, and then it cuts to 6 months later or something like that.
Something like that, and then it's back in Hawkins.
It's back in Hawkins with Russians again, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which would have given that 6 months would have given them the time to travel to Hawkins.
Yeah, because later on in the series they talk about it's not just about the energy requirement, but it's also about the location. The location. So I think that the Russians used the Hawkins experiment to break through the location, which we'll get to the ending sequence here in a little bit. But episode 1, that was what I thought was really interesting about episode 1 was Alexei, who nobody really paid any mind to in the first couple episodes, becomes such a huge character later on. And so there's a lot of foreshadowing in those first couple episodes with the machine, with the energy, with them reestablishing themselves in Hawkins. And the other thing that I really thought was really cool was when they introduced the mall. Because that was in episode 1, right? Because that's right when they show where
they show everyone. They introduce because Dustin gets back from camp. Everyone's at the mall. Steve is working at Scoops Ahoy now.
Yeah, and it was just. I mean, there's malls today. There's a couple malls that are still alive, but a lot of the old malls that have been around since the 80s, they're dying. Like, I don't even. There's some really cool ideas that we've had about what to do with the mall, doing thing with the mall and stuff like that. So we have some really cool ideas, and send me a PM if you're interested. If you have millions of dollars to invest in a venture to rejuvenate these old malls. But yeah, it captured the essence of what it was to grow up in the 80s and the 90s. Like, as soon as school was over, we'd take the metro down to Fiesta Mall and we just hang out. Or now there's a bunch of malls in my own hometown. There's the Chandler Fashion Square. And then now they have these outdoor malls. So they're not like
the strip malls.
no, they're not strip malls. They're like a bunch of store. It basically it's a mall without a roof. So like, and you can walk under the sky. It's nice if it wasn't in Arizona. I don't know. It's just not really a good thing to do in the middle of the summer, unless they put like some sort of shadow covering. But San Diego has a couple malls like that. I remember when I was there with my sister that I went to a mall and just walked around, and it was an outdoors mall. It's basically like a bunch of strip malls just close together that you can walk in between with no fear of like cars running you over or anything like that. And what I thought was really interesting right at the beginning, I want to say it was like the first 3 minutes of the season. First 3 minutes. Well, no, it's after it was like the CGI budget went through
right.
was like, it was, everything was like super better than like, cause we have a really high resolution television. And I remember when we were recapping or binging on season 1, everything looked not great. Like you could see the green screen, and you could see a little hints of the green screen, and you could see the Demogorgons, how they were kind of like CGI and stuff like that.
In the beginning, they did a lot of work with the Demogorgons where they had an actual person like in a costume.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that.
Because I remember seeing a YouTube video where they were spending all this time to put the guy into the costume and then having him do like motion work, and then they, I think, CG over the top of that.
Okay, I didn't realize that. That's kind of neat. That's a whole different element. But they did use a lot of CGI in the first season, and it was very noticeable. You could tell that the budget was significantly different now. Let's see here. What else about episode 1 that stood out? So we talked about the timeline. What I thought was, what I wrote down here is it says the timeline. It's 1 year later, so it's actually, something had to have happened in Hawkins, because it's 1 year later, but during that time, the Russians had to have bought the land, they had to build an industrial site, and then reopen the netherworld, or the upside down, right? So during that whole time, and what I'm wondering, well, I guess this plays into the mayor, because the mayor was the one who was conspiring with them. Well, he wasn't even conspiring; he was just, like any little city trying to, crooked mayors, trying to fill their own pockets with deals and stuff like that. That's how they got. They were able, because during that one episode, I don't remember which episode was that he beats up the mayor. That Hopper beats up the mayor.
Yeah, when they're in the, I think it might be,
and he sees all the deeds or something like that, right? And it's like, oh, look, they sold this, they sold that, or something like that.
Back in his house.
You probably couldn't do that nowadays,
right?
Because nowadays with social media, everybody's blabbering. Everybody's blabbing and saying, hey, that's a shady deal, that's a shady politician. And I just think it's really funny, because we're kind of experiencing that now in our own little city. But yeah, so let's see here. I was wanting to say, is there anything else that stood out from episode 1?
Episode 1, not really. I remember you making a comment one time when we were watching it about the stores in the mall, how you were like, oh, like these are like the original.
Oh yeah. They did
pointed out that's how it looked when you would go to the mall.
Yeah, like the food courts and everything like that. I remember that the malls used to be just stores at first. And if I'm not mistaken, I want to say it was Fiesta Mall that was one of the first ones that had a food court. And it became super popular, because it's like, oh my gosh, not only can you go there and hang out, but you can go there, hang out and eat. And then I remember there was another one, and there was a movie theater across the street, but you'd have to leave the mall and walk across the parking lot and go to the other, across the street to the movie theater. But then they started including theaters in the malls, and that just was super awesome. I'm trying to think, is there a theater in any of the malls here?
They don't do that much anymore. I know I think at the Riverwalk they still
Oh yeah.
have the one theater that's in there.
I think the Riverwalk is old too. The River what's it called? The River Center Mall.
Right. I think so.
River Center Mall. How old is the River Center Mall? River Center Mall. It was opened. Oh no, it's old. It was opened in 1988.
Okay,
So yeah, that's about right. Because I remember Fiesta Mall opened in the mid 80s, and then we started seeing malls like in the early 90s over there in Arizona, malls that had movie theaters, and that was really cool. So they just became like the all hangout place. Everybody goes to the mall, you know, and yeah, everything inside of the Star Court was like spot on. It looked exactly like I remembered it. So it was really cool. They did a really good job. Like, I mean, it's hard to knock them for anything.
Right.
Is there any plot holes that you can remember?
Not really. They seem to touch base on just about everything when they.
Mm-hmm. I've seen a lot of people's like, why is the Mind Flayer alive?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and a lot of people forget that at the end of season 2, when they're burning him out of Will, was it like the last or second to last episode or whatever? When they're burning him out of Will, it flies out as the thing is closing, right? And it goes up and I think Nancy follows it, and it kind of just goes up into the sky. And it looks like it just disappears. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people didn't realize that that's actually it surviving. It was finding out a way to survive.
It left Will and kind of just floated out. And I think because they closed the gate, it went dormant. But when the Russians opened the gate back up, it came back to life. And that's when it started collecting like the rats and things like that to start building its new body.
Yeah, and that leads into episode 2, which it gets him right away pretty much, right? Because Billy's like this badass kind of guy that loves older women, right? And but it's different because it's almost like the Mind Flayer, this supernatural being or demon or whatever. It has evolved. Like, it's like, okay, I'm not going to beat them this way. I'm going to beat them this other way. And so it evolves, like you said, the rats. And how does it get Billy? I forget.
I think once the rats start becoming a part of the Mind Flayer, then it has a physical body that I remember he's driving his car to go meet with Mrs. Wheeler.
Oh,
and the thing hits his windshield and he veers off into the...
What hits his windshield? Is it one of the bugs?
I think it just like throws some of its fleshiness at him.
Of its gunk. Some of its supernatural gunk. Blah. So I was going to say something really bad, but I held my tongue. Thank you, Lord. All right. So there's some sort of possession, right? And what do you think is the point of the Mind Flayer? Like, what's his purpose?
At first I was confused because when they had the Demogorgons, I thought it was just this creature working alone that just wanted to, survive and have something to eat in the Upside Down, I guess. Okay. But then as the Mind Flayer was introduced, it became more of, like they mentioned in the show, this hive mind where it's actually controlling all of these things.
Right, because in season 2, it's controlling the demo dogs, right? The demo dogs? Okay.
Which appear to just be younger versions of a Demogorgon.
Yeah. We find out later that, yes, that they are just basically infant, full-grown Demogorgons. So, but what's the point of it? You think its point is just to, like, kill everything?
That's what it tells them in season 3, I believe, is when it's speaking through Billy, he says that he's going to kill 11 and then he's going to kill all her friends, but then they just want to kill everyone. And so I think it's...
What would be the point of that?
I don't know. I guess you could see it as sort of just like a power move. Like it just wants to...
Just like a parasite?
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see that. So it's just basically like a spiritual parasite that's just trying to just... I hate people being happy. And so then it just wants to destroy everything. Like, what's its motive other than it existing?
Yeah, I don't know. That may be something that is introduced later on, but I think as of right now, it just wants to kill everything and just have control over everything and everyone.
Yeah, that's
Like expansion and conquering.
yeah, that would be a good thing to like try to figure out. Like that'd be a good conversation to have. Like, what's the point of it? Well, we know, as Christians that the whole point of the devil or whatever is to steal. He's like the thief. Well, let's just backtrack a little bit. Not necessarily the devil, even though in this passage of scripture it says that the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. But when you think about a thief, what's the motive of a thief? Maybe the thief is hungry and he needs to feed his family.
Right.
So he's needing to steal so that he can feed his family. So there's different elements of a thief. So while to us the Mind Flayer is evil, what if to it it's just like, man, I'm unemployed. I'm an unemployed Mind Flayer, and I just need to feed my family. And to him, he's innocent. He's like, these are just little beings that are in my way. They're like a pestilence, and I just need to get rid of them so that I could feed my family. It's a weird matter of perspective, but for all intents and purposes, he's just like, man, I just need to get rid of these rats, these little human rats. They're in my way, and I just need to, this is where we're gonna put up our new house, and I have dreams of putting a Mind Flayer pool in the backyard so my little demo dogs can play in it, and that's what he wants. I mean, we're being mean to a Mind Flayer, and we don't even know what the reason is for, or the reason for him existing is for. So
you could maybe also take a look at a viewpoint in which, because he is an interdimensional sort of being, what if the upside down was similar to our version of reality before, but the reason it is the way it is because perhaps he has depleted that dimension of all its resources, and now he's coming to...
In which case, he would basically just be a cancer.
And so he's trying to come over here and deplete all the resources. So he's like
he's just like a multiverse being that just goes from dimension to dimension, just devouring resources. Just so what you're saying is that he doesn't have a family, and he's just selfish. He's just a selfish, thieving, just entity that just wants to consume everything in its path because that's what gives it pleasure.
Right.
Okay, I like my version better. All right, so episode 3. That's when we start getting into the Russian spy code and stuff like that. I thought it was really clever how they played it up, because that goes back to like old school spying, where they would just just recite code and recite poems and things like that, and over airwaves. And if I remember correctly, I think it was during World War II. The United States used the Navajo, and they would broadcast these signals. I mean, not everybody had hopper radios that could pick up broadband and stuff like that, but people with ham radios and specialized radio systems could pick up the code talk of, and that's what they were called. They were called the code talkers, the Navajo code talkers, and they would just speak instructions to people across the ocean and say, okay, at this time and at that time, we're going to, attack and destroy this. But I thought it was really neat how they incorporated the spy code and everything. And then when like they were talking about the silver cat and what else, the Chinese moon, or when yellow meets blue
in the west.
Yeah, that was really clever. That code was really, really neat. Let's see here. So, were you able to figure any of those things out?
No, not at all.
Not at all. The only thing that I figured out was the silver. Was it the silver fox or the silver cat?
The silver cat, because that was the company that was doing all that.
That was the only thing that I figured out. I'm like, oh, because it reminded me of when Trinity told Neo, follow the white rabbit, and the white rabbit was a tattoo on that girl.
Right.
And so that to him meant, that I'm supposed to go with him. So it was similar to that. like kind of like that kind of messaging. So I'm like, okay, it's probably like in my head, I'm thinking it's probably like a company. But yeah, one thing that I really noticed in episode 3 was that made this, again, I realized it. I had probably, just accepted it throughout the seasons, but in episode 3, I really loved how the dialogue was paced. Like everything, there's just not enough compliments to make for this series, because just the way that there's a part in season 3 where Hopper and Joyce are arguing, and just the pacing of the argument where they're fighting with each other. It was really, really cool because I noticed underneath that the music was following along with them. Like like as they would say something and then it'd be revealed, and like, oh, and then the music would change. I think a lot of people don't realize how powerful that is, that the pacing of the music followed the pacing of the argument. And it was just really, really neat. And a lot of, especially amateur filmmakers, don't understand the power of a perfectly timed music bed. And that was really, really well done for me. Let's see here. And another thing I noticed in episode 3 was the introduction of Miss Driscoll.
Oh, right.
When they were talking at the table, remember they were talking about, she's a conspiracy theorist and all that stuff. She said that Johnson killed Kennedy. Do you remember that part?
Yeah.
That stood out to me, and this is the reason why. Because there actually is a conspiracy theory that Lyndon Johnson had Kennedy killed, and there's a lot of things out right now about supernatural things and alien conspiracy theories that Kennedy, well, not Area 51, but some things that had happened in New Mexico where they found this cave of ancient artifacts. I want to say it's New Mexico. And Kennedy was going to reveal it in the early 60s, like, hey, this is like a national treasure. And John Kennedy was adamantly against secret societies, he was all for government transparency, like, hey, this is what we have. And so essentially what ended up happening was this is kind of a known, it's not a fact because it's still a conspiracy theory, but that he was going to reveal a lot of what the CIA was doing, a lot of what the secret government projects were and stuff like that. If I don't know if you've ever read, but Project Blue Book was around this time when they were trying to figure out where all these UFOs were coming. And the idea in this conspiracy theory is that Johnson, being the hand of the military industrial complex, said, we can't have that. Like, that cannot happen. So he conspired. The idea is that Johnson conspired with the CIA, who conspired with Russia. See, a lot of people don't. There's a Russia connection that conspired with Russia because Lee Harvey Oswald he was in the military. He was a Marine, if I'm not mistaken. And when he left, he was so disheartened with the way that the government was run. He left the United States and he did a stint in Russia. And his wife was a Russian national. When he came back here, a lot of people say that maybe Lee Harvey Oswald had connections with Russian CIA, like a Russian KGB and stuff like that. And he's the one that conspired with the CIA to have John F. Kennedy assassinated. So I thought that was a really interesting detail, because that connection between Johnson and Kennedy that Ms. Driscoll stated has a connection to Russia, which is what half of season 2 and all of season 3 is about, is about a connection to Russia. And so there's a small little detail that I don't think a lot of people picked up on. And if you're a conspiracy theorist, you heard it, and you're like, Johnson and Kennedy, Russia, Lee Harvey Oswald. Yeah, that's all connected. It's all connected to. So then it makes me wonder, how does Mrs. Driscoll, how is she connected to Russia? So it points to me like Russia has had some sort of influence in Hawkins for a lot longer than what we're being shown in the series. Like there's people in there, like maybe the mayor, maybe other characters that we haven't discovered
Been
yet.
introduced to.
Yeah, been introduced to, which I think season 4 will touch on a lot more. And this is a complete abstraction from what I'm just saying. But another thing that they introduced in episode 3, which I thought was really subtle, was, and I don't know how to take this, but there's 2 ways. When Mike and Will get in a fight over the D&D game, remember? And Will says, you're always with your stupid girlfriend or something like that. And
Mike says it's not our fault that you don't like girls.
Yeah. And I thought that was really powerful. That can mean 2 things. That can mean either Will is not matured as much as the rest of the guys, because all of them have girlfriends except for him. Susie Q, 11 and Max and what's his name?
Who?
There's Mike, Will,
Mike
Dustin,
11.
and
Mike, Will, Dustin, and Caleb. Wait, Lucas.
Lucas, yeah, Caleb's real.
the actor.
The actor, right. I'm like, it's not Caleb. Why can't I think Lucas? So Lucas and Max, Mike and 11, Dustin and Susie, and Will and Dungeons and Dragons. Will is in love. So he has an obsession with Dungeons and Dragons. So it could either point to the fact that he hasn't grown up yet. He hasn't hit that level of maturity. And the fact that his hair is cut is kind of still like the same from when he was a kid 3-4 years ago. That could play into the maturity factor. But I also thought it was interesting that he didn't respond when he said, we can't help it that you don't like girls. It was almost like the rest of the guys knew that he doesn't like girls, but they hadn't mentioned it. So it's almost a subtle way to introduce perhaps his orientation. What do you think? Is that a stretch?
I don't know. Maybe. But I think even if that is the case, it would be very difficult for him to actually express that, because because of the time that was, it was a lot less,
acceptable.
Normal. Yeah,
right.
acceptable for that. I think that's made apparent in the 7th episode when Steve and Robin are having that conversation.
Yeah, that's true, because she's probably braver than what Will would be, and she doesn't fully come out. She just kind of, hey man, I'm trying to tell you something here without telling you something. Yeah. So we talked about in season or episode 3 is where they cracked the code and everything like that. I thought that was really neat. But I thought that was really cool how they threw that in there about it's almost like evolving or developing his character without actually having to dive into that. It's almost like just, hey, here's a little bit of representation of who Will is, and there you have it.
I think you can also see the maturity side of things as well, because at the end of that episode, actually, when he goes back to Castle Byers and he's looking at those old pictures of when they were younger.
So it's almost like a goodbye to innocence kind of thing?
Sort of, yeah, because, he has that breakdown and he tears up all the pictures of them when they were younger, dressing up and playing D&D and things like that. And then he destroys the castle. Right.
Yeah, I guess that could point to the other fact, which is just his maturity. He's saying goodbye to his innocence, and in a very visceral way. Yeah, that's a really good take. I totally forgot that he went back there. Episode 4.
I like this one.
This is the one where it starts out where Nancy and her boyfriend are trying to get that story. And she presents the story to Mrs. Driscoll's story to the newspaper, and they kind of make fun of her. I thought this was really interesting for 2 things. Yes, granted, she's an intern, and she shouldn't probably have been in that situation where she's trying to assert herself, because she's just an intern. And she doesn't really know. She has a very naive view of how it should work. And I saw a couple things introduced here, which was equality. like, hey, I'm a woman and I can contribute, and they're just laughing at her because she's a woman. But later on, what's the boyfriend's name? Jonathan. He's saying, he starts to talk about how, look, we're just interns. You can't just barge in there. I mean, we're only interns. We haven't earned the right to sit at that table. Now, granted, all those guys were jerks, right?
Right.
They were all just chauvinistic jerks. And they didn't have any right to treat her that way. But back in that time, that was the norm. And the other thing that was introduced, so you have an equality gap there. The other thing that was introduced that was very relevant was the fact that when they were driving away after they got fired, remember, after they got fired, because Miss Driscoll was talking about suing them and everything. Was that this episode?
Yeah.
Okay.
The beginning of the episode, because she had already gone to the hospital, and he was talking about how she was a schizophrenic, and how her family was super upset that they
and they were thinking about suing them newspaper and shutting them down, and so they got fired. So on their way away from that, when they were talking in the car, Jonathan was trying to explain to her, hey, you can't do that because you're just an intern girl. And he's like, well, you don't know what it's like. He's like, well, this is my only job. Like, we know what it's like to be poor, and we know what it's like to search for a job and have people tell you no, based on your ethnicity or based on your name or whatever. Not necessarily that directly happened to me. That was I misspoke there. But my point is that, being poor, you experience life differently. You experience life completely different. Like, your friends are all going to this really fancy restaurant, and you're like, I'll just go, and then you go, and then you order just an appetizer for you and your wife, and you just both get waters, and then what you say is you're not hungry. Well, in reality, it's you don't have enough money to eat like everybody else does, but you want to be a part of the group, so you go and you just make up an excuse like, oh, we're fasting, we're not hungry, and that was really real to me because I've been poor. And we've been in situations where we don't have enough money to do what everybody else is doing. We don't buy the season passes to this and the season passes to that. And she says she's talking to him about the gender gap between males and females, and how females are kind of like second-class citizens in the workforce. And he's talking to her about, well, you
Like
don't
the
understand what it's, the economic gap, which is you don't understand what it's like to be poor. Like, this job was supposed to pay for my college, and now I don't have it. She didn't have to worry about that because she has college paid for. All she cared about was her ideology of the equal treatment between men and women. What he was doing is he was talking about, just surviving economically. Like, I needed this job so that I could get money to go to school. I thought that was really powerful conversation. I don't know if anybody else noticed it. I'm sure some people did, but that stuck out to me because that's really close to our life. I don't know how much you remember from when you were a kid, but we weren't very rich. I mean, we're not rich now, but we weren't doing so hot for several years there when we were little. But we tried to make it so where you guys never could tell, but I'm pretty sure you could tell if you look back. But that was really interesting. And then they introduced the character of Erica. Erica at Scoops Ahoy. And one of the things that stood out to me was the statement where she says, well, you can't spell America without Erica. And I thought that was really, really cool how they introduced her character. And they introduced her well because she had spunk, she had pizzazz, she had an attitude that perfectly fit the narrative, I thought, and helped the storyline tremendously. It wasn't just one of those tropes where, you throw in a black character just for the sake of throwing in a black character. Like, she was a strong young kid that had attitude, that had worth, that contributed hugely to the plot. I mean, without Erica, you don't get any of the rest of the episodes. So it was so cool how they incorporated it. She was actually more important than Lucas was, I would say. She was more instrumental than the character of Lucas.
Yeah.
because of how she helped them get into the Russian thing. What do you think of her character?
I think she has a lot of energy and a lot of, like you were saying, that attitude, which I think was introduced a little bit in the second season, because there were those small parts of the second season where she was
At the
there
door?
and she,
Yeah, like when she-
like at the door, and when she would be on the walkie-talkie, and like the interactions between her and Lucas. And you start to see that character that becomes this pivotal role in the third season.
Yeah, that was a really good. Yeah, I forgot that she was in season 2. Well, I didn't. I forgot. But yeah, those interactions were very pivotal to her development, and she was just great. I think whoever that little girl was, I don't know her name.
Name's Priya Ferguson.
Well, you know better than me. You took probably more detailed notes than I did, and you memorized them. I'm over here on like an old man reading from a piece of digital paper here. And one thing that struck me outside of moving forward in episode 4 was how Will could still feel the flare. Why do you think that? How do you explain that?
I think because he had that connection with the Mind Flayer, because the Mind Flayer was a part of him for so long. I think when
For 2 seasons, right?
Yeah. And when it left, I think he still had part of that in him. I mean, they got out everything they could to control, but I guess he, at this point, knows what it feels like to have the Mind Flayer there. So anytime that it is there, he can just kind of sense it, like that familiarity.
His Peter tingles. If you haven't seen Spider-Man Far From Home, that's a reference from that movie. His Peter tingles. So he's got his his willy tingles. Oh, that doesn't sound right. That doesn't sound right at all. He's got will tingles. Will tingles.
And the amount of times that he touches his neck during the season.
Oh, you said something about that. Like there was
earlier, I was watching this interview, and they were talking about, doing a drinking game, take a shot every time that Will touches his neck during the season. Because anytime anything has to do with the Mind Flayer, he's like, it's here.
It's here. I can feel it. It was almost like a Jedi sense. It was his Peter tingles. Yeah, and he was, well, I think season 2, he'd had a lot of PTSD. And I mean, for all that happened to him in season 1, can you imagine? I mean, I remember Gavin got lost one time, and we lost him at a very busy mall, and that scared. I mean, he was missing for over 15 minutes, and I mean, not seeing your kid for 2 or 3 minutes, like in a crowd, that's kind of scary. But we could not find him, and so we found him. He's still with us, but that whole time was just so scary without him. And I don't know what it was like for him. To him, he was just like looking for us. You know what I'm saying? He wasn't, if I remember correctly, he wasn't very frightened at all. He was just like, I don't know where my parents are. Maybe we should have a conversation about that. But I can't imagine being a lost kid. Well, I can, because I got lost once when I was little. I got lost in 1986. I was 8 years old, and I got lost. But I got lost at Disneyland. So it's not like I got lost in a mall with all these scary adults. It was like I got lost at Disneyland, where there's Mickey Mouse and there's Goofy and there's Pluto. So it wasn't like I was lost in a very bad place. And come to find out, my dad was actually had seen me, and he just kept following me to see where I would go. So it wasn't like I was ever really lost. I was just like curious, I'm like, well, okay, I can't find my parents. I guess I'll just keep walking around till I see them. And they had gone into the Pirates of the Caribbean, and I guess I got lost when they were going in the line, because the line at the Pirates of the Caribbean in Disneyland is really weird. So like I turned around and they were gone. I didn't see them going to the line. And so I just kept walking and walking. I went to the little French Quarter, and then I guess my dad found me at the Haunted Mansion. And so I wasn't necessarily scared, but my point being that I can't imagine being Will being stuck for a whole season. For I don't know how long does that take place. It's just over the course of a couple days, right?
Yeah, just a few days.
Like a week or not a week. Or
Not a week.
Nothing like that.
Well,
remember? I can't remember how
maybe,
long does
because
week does. Let's see here.
I think it was just a few days.
It had to have been. I can't remember what the timeline is. I'll have to look that up. I didn't research that. But whatever it is, let's say it's, I mean, like I said, Gavin was gone for 15 minutes and that was torture for us.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine him being gone for 3 days, you know, in this crazy, scary looking world. My point being, everything that happened in season 2, I mean, the amount of traumatic stress that he had because of all that, you know, the fact that he only gets a tingle every once in a while is actually kind of pretty good recovery, you know, when you think about it in the grand scope. Like, he spent several days in one of the creepiest, darkest forests imaginable, and then he was possessed by this Mind Flayer thing for several days, if not a week. For him to only come out of it with just Peter tingles, I think he did all right. And then it kind of turns into his superpower because he's able to tell, you know, the
Where
group that he's
this
with
thing
is
is.
like, hey, there's danger coming, like, you know. Let's see here. One thing in episode 4 was when she was fighting what's his name, Billy, at that pool. That was just, Gavin got ahead of us, right? Gavin got ahead of us watching these episodes. And you
just
said
this one, just
this one?
4.
And you said he was screaming. Right?
I remember because I left to take a shower to get ready for work, and and so I was like, yeah, you can just keep watching it. I'll watch it at work while I'm waiting to clock in. And so I got out of the shower, and I called down. I was like, is it over? And he's like, no, it's not over. And so I stayed upstairs. And then, you know, towards when the episode would have been ending, he's just like downstairs, like screaming at the TV.
Yeah. And Gavin, if y'all know Gavin, well, most of y'all won't know Gavin, but for those that do know that the dude is just hyper, I don't know, he's not hyper emotional, but he just screams at everything. I guess I do too, but so he gets that from me. But yeah, it's hilarious to watch him just like get anxious about, you know, this sequence. And this sequence was just insane. So at the end, Elle and Billy start fighting because they're trying to smoke out the Mind Flayer out of Billy, the same way that they tried to get
Due to Will.
And they were successful with Will, but with Billy, he was too strong. He was too strong.
Scene in the sauna with Billy,
Max.
I think. Well, with Billy, I think it was like super, like, well done and super emotional. When he's like pleading and he's talking about like, please, like,
Yeah.
I didn't mean to, he made me do it, and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, it's almost like a mechanism that the Mind Flayer has learned. It's like, these guys are susceptible.
Well, unless that
Was really Billy?
was actually Billy.
I don't think so.
And he's actually, because I remember Will talking about how the thing is dormant until it needs you. And I think at the beginning part of that sequence, that's actually Billy like super angry at them to let him out. And he's actually like hurting and actually regretting these things because he's killed people.
Okay.
And
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I don't think, because there's that physical indicator with his veins turning black and things like that, and it wasn't until like after he was already part of the way through his pleading that Will was like, hey, he's here.
Oh, yeah, dude. That's a great observation. I didn't even think about that. You're right. You're right. So it was Billy just being Billy, just being upset. I see what you're saying. And then when it arrived, Will was like, he did his thing with his neck. Okay. Yeah. Okay. That's good. That's good. It's a great observation. Didn't even think of it that way. But yeah, that makes sense. So it was Billy, and then it arrived. It was like, now I'm going to take over. And that's when all chaos.
And he grabbed the thing and hit through the window.
Hit through the glass to try to get Max and everything like that. Yeah.
Another note about that episode that I thought was funny it was an interview with Dacre Montgomery about the season, and he was talking about that episode in particular. And he had mentioned that because obviously he's Australian, and so when he has to do this accent for this character, which is a pretty good accent that he maintains throughout the show. But I went back and rewatched that part of the episode, and because he had talked about how he falls back into his Australian accent when he's breaking through the window and yelling at them to let him out. And so there's the
I'm
part
gonna have to
where
watch that.
he like is cursing at them. He says that he's gonna gut them, and it's in an Australian accent.
Oh, I gotta listen to that. We gotta go back after the podcast. Let's go watch that episode to see what happens there. I didn't catch that. That's really neat. Yeah, but that was an intense sequence altogether. That fight, I thought Elle was going to die in that sequence. I was like, oh man, no, they're gonna kill her. And I think it points to the future. It's a foreshadowing, I think, because eventually, I think, to some degree, Elle has to die.
Mm-hmm.
You can't have a series where well, I guess you could have a series where you don't kill off any important characters, but there's no drama. There's nothing in that.
Kills off important, like Billy was.
Yeah, but he was still a tertiary character. I mean, he was important in the fact that, he created tension in season 2.
Mm-hmm. And he was almost the whole conflict in season 3. He was the physical embodiment of.
But it wasn't like one of the 5, one of the 4.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Right.
Max, I think, is still more important because she's
a big influencer of 11 in this season.
Yeah. All the puppy love and everything, all the infatuations that are happening. So she helps out a lot there. Yeah. Well, I guess he's not. Yeah, you're right. He's not a tertiary character. He's a main character, but
At least in the 3rd season.
But I think that one of the main characters will have to die.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to go ahead and end this podcast right now and make this like a 2-parter.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to go ahead and conclude it to make it easier for you guys to consume. So guys, make sure that you like, subscribe, and share this podcast. And we'll be releasing episode, I guess this would be 6.5 or what is it? Let's see. Yeah, 6.5, which will be the second part of Stranger Things. So it just makes it easier for you guys to listen to. And yeah, we'll look forward to the next reviewing the next couple chapters, next couple episodes. All right. You don't have to clap.